recording now, and I am recording. This presentation is being recorded, so you can also listen to it offline as well. So if you have to step out, just mark your place and you can catch back up quickly. But without further ado, I'll turn this over to Dr. Gupta.
Well, James, it's entirely my pleasure to be here this afternoon and to join your group of members here. Delighted to be here. And what I'd like to do or share up front about this session is that I want this to be highly interactive. So as you're listening to my next slides, if you can just take a moment to perhaps communicate with James about your background, or are you listening to this webinar from a hiring manager's perspective, from a manager of a manufacturing facility, or are you a potential employee who's looking to enter the manufacturing sector? If you can just share a little bit about your background with James, that would be great, because then I can certainly make sure that I tailor my presentation to this audience. The second thing, as James already mentioned, was I want to make sure that unlike webinars where the speaker speaks for a long time and then you had some questions that were unanswered, I want to make sure that we take this time to answer any questions that you may have. So let me start off by talking about what do we mean by high tech, because what we hear often in the news, in other places, is the high-tech sector. And are the skills that we are talking about really unique only to the high-tech sector, or do they not apply to other industries? And when we talk about high-tech, what we really mean is that we are talking about industries where the proportion and usage of technology is high, is great, is intense. We are talking about industries where technology is a key driver of the success of that industry. That's not to say that other industries don't use technology, but what we are really referring to, for example, it could be aerospace, it could be biotechnology, it could be bioengineering, it could be data informatics, or the informatics industry, or healthcare informatics. We are talking about industries, sectors, companies where the use of technology is great. The next question that people often ask me is, well, all of these skills that you're talking about, does it mean that it's true only for the high-tech sector and not for other industries? And certainly that's not the implication by any means. What we are really saying here is that the skills that I'm going to talk about are in high demand in these high-tech sectors, but equally important, the high-tech sector survival and the potential for an employee in such a sector to succeed will be diminished without these skills. This may or may not be the case with other industries or non-high-tech industries, but it's very much relevant for high-tech industries. In other words, if you are seeking a career in a high-tech industry, or if you're running a company, an organization in the high-tech sector, then these skills are crucial for survival and for sustainability. So what I'd like to do in this webinar is to bring together 4 pieces that I think are crucial for both individuals, for employees, as well as organizations to think about when we say, how can I be successful in the manufacturing industry or in the high-tech sector? These 4 elements are equally applicable whether you're an individual or you're an organization. And the challenge is that when we listen to the media or when we read articles, often what they may do is to talk about one piece without really integrating and interrelating these 4 pieces. So let me briefly touch on these 4 pieces. The first one, which is really, I would say, the newest dimension that we are now seeing both in the research world and as consultants that we are seeing emerging is this, that the most important thing that we need to understand to be successful is how our brains work. The field of neuroscience has now come a long way, and we now have powerful, extraordinary research that is coming out of the neuroscience field, that if businesses were to pay attention to this, they can really think through how do we motivate employees, how do we reward employees, why do we make the decisions that we do in the way that we do that, why do we make mistakes, why is it that sometimes we commit these really glaring errors, what is it that triggers this, how do we create a workplace that is truly a happy and productive workplace where individuals bring their full potential to the workplace and are committed to the success of it. These questions and many others, once upon a time, used to be only within the managerial context, where we simply talked about as frameworks, as leadership principles, this is what you can do. But the beauty now is we now have scientific evidence that we can bring into play as we talk about running successful organizations or building our own successful career path. We can learn from neuroscience. So that's the first one about brain, about our brains, and I'll talk about that further. The second piece is people skills, people talent, ability to interface with people from diverse cultures, ability to work in teams, ability to communicate successfully, abilities to really understand how to motivate others and how to influence others. Often what we see, particularly in the Western world, is that we often try to develop influence using our title. Many managers, many leaders, so for example, whether it's the CEO or the COO, we say, okay, this is a person with a powerful title, so I better listen up, right? But what we are really seeing now in the workforce and the best practices is how do we influence people? And this influence can be applied at all levels within the organization. So for example, if you are an employee in a high-tech sector and your title may not be that powerful or it may not be at the top of the hierarchy, you still have an amazing opportunity to be an individual of influence, and these are the people that often go up the corporate ladder. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The third dimension that is crucial when we are talking about the high-tech sector is the technology piece. And when we talk about the technology piece, our definition of technology has itself now become a term with no boundaries. In other words, when once upon a time, say 10, 20, 30 years ago, when we said the word computer, it could mean a mainframe. Or when we talked about databases, it could be a legacy database. Today, when we talk about technology, we mean something that is so invisible, so intuitive, that from a child to a senior citizen, and you know, it could be anybody in the age group, they have the ability to use technology. Because see, when you're sitting in a plane, or we see kids using iPad or the iPhone, and it comes so naturally to them. So the definition of technology is now anything that is unobtrusive and highly intuitive. So imagine the range of things that falls under this umbrella to focus on is the future, right? So everybody has some sense about this is what we are heading toward when we talk about the future. Here are maybe some broad trends. But the challenge in organizations, to really zoom in on trends that can affect us as organizations. And if you look back and you see the play of history, what is very obvious is that it's not that these trends or these insights were available only to one or two people or one or two organizations. Often we call this as insights. It's right under our nose. It's just that we are not trained to see that. And I want to touch on that because that's a very important thing, an important skill both for individuals. I'll take just a few minutes to see if you have any questions before I go further.
Okay,
James, you can just read the question out to me or let me know how you'd like me to handle it.
Not a problem.
Any questions from the audience?
We actually do have a couple of questions. We have a nice mixture today of folks that are looking as manufacturing engineering candidates, want to improve their career, and we do have a couple of managers. And one of the questions that we have regards the how the brain works question on the initial four pieces that you had touched on, and when you on how management and that can create a better work, how they can create a better workforce or a workplace. Are there any types of programs that are available to companies where they can gauge the people that they are interviewing if they're a good fit for the team? And then also, are there any studies that show how you can create a work environment that's engaging? Did you hear that?
Very good. It's an excellent question, and I have a couple of slides further down. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
James?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So that's an excellent question about, how do we take these research findings and how do we apply it to build meaningful, productive workplaces. And this is part of the work that I do. It's not like a simple questionnaire that somebody fills out. The key is to truly understand where your organization now is currently in terms of its culture to tap into the talent potential that you have. So the work begins by truly first listening to leaders, influencers, as we call them. These may be individuals with a brand title or without. And by looking into that, then we come up with specific ideas. Let me just touch on one because I don't want to skip this question. It's a very important one. And the point is that often we believe that right, or by giving them a reward if they successfully complete a project. Often people are surprised when I say that, they say, that can't be true. Well, heck, it is true because research and compelling evidence shows this. Rewards of this kind, where we pay people a bonus or some X amount of dollars, works well for what we call projects or tasks that are less on the heuristic scale. That means it doesn't require too much intuition, it doesn't require too much problem solving, critical thinking. A case in point could be that we pay somebody who works in a warehouse and we tell them that if you can stack 100 boxes, you get a bonus of X dollars. People in tasks such as those are highly motivated by a bonus. When you look at people who bring their intuitive skills, problem solving, what we call a complex skill set to the workplace, money has to be set right up front so that they don't feel cheated or that it's unfair. But beyond that, the bonus can actually work backwards, have a regressing effect, because then the individual says, look, I get these bonuses if I'm successful, which means I should not be a risk taker. So that's a very good point. Unfortunately, I'll have to take a lot of time to talk about all the other aspects of that, and perhaps at some point in time in the future, I could come back, and James, I'm not trying to wiggle another webinar out of you, but it may be something worthwhile to talk about how to bring neuroscience into the discussion of being an outstanding manager and motivating your employees. So let me proceed to talk about the 4 things that I touched upon earlier. The first thing that I want to look at is the human brain. So these are just a few of the strands of thought that we should pay attention to. What has happened is that the way we learn, or the way we learn, is no longer as relevant as what is needed to be successful today. So the way we learned in the past, and I'm going to just touch very, very briefly on each of these, because as you can see, there's a lot to be covered in this slide. So the way we learned once upon a time was we learned from books, and the knowledge was fairly static, and the knowledge was fairly steady and stable for a period of time. All of that has gone away now. We live in a Google world. We live in a world where knowledge is highly dynamic, and we live in a world where knowledge is no longer the privilege of just a few, right? Only those who could afford to go to college or get a certificate or something once had access. Now, knowledge is readily available for anyone who's curious. The second piece to touch on is what we retain and how we retain. So what we retain is critical because that leads to pattern recognition, and it's important for us to not only be able to retain, but to be able to draw the information overload that's happening in our brain. In spite of that, for us to be able to draw what is relevant to today, to the challenge that's facing us right now. The dots that we connect is what sets apart our product. Pattern recognition is crucially important, and I'll touch upon in a future slide how we do this pattern recognition in effective ways. How do we continue to build that? Finally, how we unlearn has become as important as how we learn. Why is this the case? It is the case because knowledge is dynamic, and we have to be able to shed our skin like a snake does regularly to absolutely and keenly focus on how we unlearn what is no longer relevant. Next, let's move to the people cell. And this is extremely important. The reason this is extremely important is because how we interact with people influences how our brain works. So this has a very, very powerful influence on our thinking and on our ability to make decisions. Well, you know, on LinkedIn, I have, I don't know, 2,000 connections. I think I have 2,000 connections, but that really doesn't mean what. What are networks of people who are from different industries in recognition that I spoke about earlier. The art of influencing others is a big shift that we are seeing happening in the world of leadership. So what we once used to say are the traits that a leader must have. One of the traits that is being hotly debated is how can leaders create influencers within the organization? That's not to be sneaky or malicious or anything, but what what we want to do is to have people who have a positive influence, who are critical thinkers, regardless of their title, be able to influence and build organizations at different levels. And of course, you all have heard about the importance of working with diverse groups. And now we have compelling evidence that when an organization is diverse, when its teams are diverse, the performance, the profit margin of organizations that have diverse teams is estimated to be 14% higher than those that don't. So it's no longer, oh, this is a nice thing to do, this is what society expects us to do, but now we are able to see the link between diverse thinking, and it's not just about ethnicity or gender, but diverse ideas, how do we promote that, and the impact on the bottom line. And I think I touched on the other two, how we lead and how we see patterns. So I'm going to move to the technology piece. So what we see when we talk about the technology piece is this. And in a keynote that I did a few months ago, where I addressed chief security officers and chief information officers, what we talked about was the world of disruption. Often we see that there's a lot of debate and discussion about innovation. But what you as managers and what you as potential employees in a high-tech sector is the two things. One, the risk of being disrupted. What we are now seeing is a young breed of entrepreneurs who are coming with really traditional models of doing business. Just a simple case in point could be Uber, right? What they have done around the country is a prime example. You can look at Airbnb, which now has more residential properties than I believe it was Hyatt and Westin combined. Now, take a moment to think about that model. Without building a single facility, without investing $1 in infrastructure, a technology company is giving a run for the money of these two giant leaders in the hotel industry. So what we need to pay attention to is what are the risks that my industry, my way of doing business can get wiped out. And it takes just maybe 2 to 3 years to completely wipe out an industry. Encyclopedia is a very good example of what happened to the world. I know some of you may be very young, you may not even know what an encyclopedia used to look like, but for the rest of us, we can have a piece to think about. The second way to approach innovation is to look actively how you can be the one that disrupts your industry. And again, this can provide huge profit margins. The second thing is if you are buying technology or using technology, what we want to look at is new ways to be intuitive and to be integrated in order to address not just your internal problems or operations, but to serve your customers. Those are the virtues that customers are looking for. Let's move to the final block, which is the future, how we pay attention, what we pay attention to, how we associate, and how we think. So as I shared with you, when we talk about the future and when we talk about trends and when we say, wow, this caught me completely off guard, the reason for that is many of us are not truly paying attention to what needs to be paid attention to. And why is that? There are several reasons, and I'll touch on a couple of them in the future slides. But what is in high demand today is our attention and our attention span. And what we pay attention to and how we pay attention is truly the two dimensions that intersect to give us that creativity moment. But what we see today in the world in which we live is that our attention has really become the property of companies, of organizations, of marketers, right? They're repeatedly pulling us to draw our attention to something or the other. The New York Times recently had an article that talked about how the TSA, when you're going through the security line at an airport, even they have started to draw your attention, because it says that in these little boxes where you put your keys and your iPhone, even there they have ads, right? Now you may just glance at that ad, but our brain, when it's completely drawn even for 10 seconds, 30 seconds to pay attention to something, our ability to really focus on the important things can shift. And I'll talk about a couple of other reasons why that happens. And how we associate and how we think affects our ability to really see the true trends that are shaping our world. So James, I can pause for a few minutes and take another question. We are now at 1:30, so 1:29.
Yeah, we're at plenty of time. I think the one question that comes up as well is when you were talking about the 4 points is on the technology side, the disruptive technologies, because as you well know, disruptive, that has a negative connotation. It's almost like destructive, and then when we're looking at the integration and innovation, what are some of the characteristics you want to look for a type of disruptive technology, and then how is the best way to integrate something like that, depending on a particular industry, if you have an example?
Sure. So what we are looking at is escalated innovation leads to disruption.
Okay.
Innovation that is no longer incremental, not a small change, but a massive change that is leaps so far ahead, in leaps and bounds ahead of a current product or a current service, that it leads to the disruption of an entire industry. Okay? So I'll give you two examples. Both are high-tech. One is a student, Elizabeth, I can't remember her last name, doesn't pop up in my head right now. She was at Stanford, and she looked at the way that blood tests were done. And she thought this was just insane. She did not like the model. And she drops out of Stanford, and she starts this company that has a new and innovative way, a much easier way of doing the blood test, getting the blood results. And today she's listed as she's often referred to, and I'm disappointed that I cannot remember her last name, and I'll be happy to email it to you if you want to share that with your participants, James, later. And she has now established herself. She's a billionaire. I think she's under 30 years old, simply because she said this is not the way to do business. That's one example. The other example is what we are seeing in terms of the thermostats that we use in our house, right? Honeywell has held this market forever and forever, right? And when you look at the concept of thermostat, it's as dead an idea as you can imagine. Why? Because when I'm outside the home, I live in New York, we have cold days and we have days when it's not so cold. But when I cannot control my thermostat from outside my home, I want an intelligent thermostat. And this guy from Apple left and started this company. And he started the company because he was building a fancy home, and he said he was looking for an intelligent thermostat and couldn't find it. So the next industry that is really going to face some serious challenges is how we relate to all the appliances, the devices at our home, and the ability for them to talk to each other and to really save on the utilities. The earlier two examples I gave, Airbnb, Uber, are also very good examples of what is happening in disruption. If you look at higher ed, if you look at e-learning and online learning, higher ed is often slow to respond to these kind of challenges because they think, well, it will never affect us. Like, who's ever going to be without coming to a college or university? We are estimating that in the next 10 years, the decline, the number of college closings will be on the rise quite significantly. Right? We are expecting that anywhere between 30 to 40% of colleges, especially private colleges, will close because no longer the idea of spending tons of money to go to a place to learn something where you come out and the employer says, well, I need a different set of skills or you're not prepared enough. Those are some examples of disruption. So although the word may have a negative connotation, another way to look at it is extraordinary innovation that breaks the boundaries of the current status quo and at the same time attracts customers in droves. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So what we see repeatedly, especially when I consult for companies or we work with individuals to do some career counseling, is, and this is very natural, it's not anybody's fault, all of us go through this and all of us, it happens to all of us. So I want to put that in context. What we think is that what can I do today to be prepared for the next level in my career pathway? So if I am a project manager and I want to become the manager of the team, I'm looking at it exclusively from what do I need to build on my, my skill list so that in my resume I can show that I'm prepared to be a manager or a director or whatever else it may be, the next level. And what we ask both employers and employees to think about is what is my value to the industry of tomorrow, right? Not to what is my value for the next position in my career pathway, but the industries that are emerging, and if they were to hire, what value am I bringing to that? So a very good example that a colleague of mine gave was ask yourself if a Silicon Valley entrepreneur would be interested in your profile. And if the answer is a dead no, then you start to build from there, because that group of industries and companies are starting to take over the world in some ways. I mean, that might be an exaggeration, I think it is, but to start to look at what is the industry of tomorrow and do I have the skill sets to do that. I touched on this earlier, and that is what is my complex skill set, right? When we talk about a complex skill set, what we are talking about is not just what are the projects that you worked on, how did you influence and affect and improve the bottom line, not just that, but to really look at holistically what is the complex skill set that I bring to the table. So this could mean your technology skill set, your industry skill set, your industry knowledge, experience, expertise, your technology knowledge, expertise, experiences. What we want to look at is a deeper skill set which includes some of the things that I touched upon earlier. The ability to learn and unlearn and to create innovation, right? What have you innovated that has the potential? And we are not talking about patents or any of that. We are simply saying take a look at the innovation angle that you have, the entrepreneurial angle that you have, the ability to work with diverse populations. So when people say, I'm very good at problem solving, we need to have examples of problem solving, critical thinking, learning, unlearning, pattern recognition, right? Those are the skill sets that come under a complex skill set. This is an important question. Actually, this is a table with four different parameters and cells. We won't have the time to go into that. So I picked one of that, and that is, what do I know that I don't know? So very quickly, what do I know that I know? That's good. That never gets us into too much trouble. What do I know that I don't know? That can get us into trouble. And the one that can really get us into trouble is, what is it that I don't know that I don't know? Right. So for today, for this webinar, we'll focus on just this one. What do I know that I don't know? And if you have a good, clear understanding, and this will take some work, you really have to sit down in a quiet place and really think through this carefully, because it's very difficult. A couple of things will surface to the top of your brain immediately. You say, oh yeah, I need to learn that program or this or that. But you need to do a deeper dive to answer that. And that is a starting point for you to go back to the number one and to be able to answer that. What are my core soft skill competencies? Often we find in resumes, people will list a long list of things. But everyone is good at a few things that can be extraordinarily useful to an employer or to the individual who is trying to promote himself or herself to the next level. So focus on your core skills. Research shows that often we spend a lot of time working on our weaknesses. That rarely works. What we need to focus on is how can we complement our strengths so that we bring a bigger portfolio to the table. What is my ability to cross over to other industries? This is a critical question for employees who are looking to be successful in the future. If you look, for example, only within the manufacturing sector, you may miss some golden opportunities that await you in other sectors that may not be looking for a technologist, but they are looking for people with certain core competencies that can be very helpful to other sectors. And I think in the coming years, we will see more of that. I think this is an extraordinarily important question. Where is my cultural fit? Often we look at a job and we say, wow, this is a great job, and I'm going to go join this company. And sometimes we end up being as miserable as we possibly can be. So it's crucial to really understand what is the type of organization where you really thrive and go only, be a part only of those kind of organizations. And lastly, all of these questions are very important. This is an equally important question. Am I a generalist or a specialist, and why? And a generalist should look to see, can I become a specialist in some area and do a deep dive? So for example, my PhD is in industrial engineering, and I have an MBA, and I have a master's in mathematics. So when I looked at this portfolio, I intuitively gravitated towards situations, problems, careers, where I could work with people, the challenges that they were facing. I was intuitively drawn to organizations that needed help to grow or to look at their cultural fit or to improve, enhance the motivation of their employees. I was intuitively drawn to these kinds of problems. So in some ways, I'm a generalist because I have an engineering background and I have a business background and I've taught in business schools. So I have that, but I'm also a specialist when it comes to organizational culture, leadership issues, bringing neuroscience and brain research to solve business problems. So I have worked hard to be a generalist in some ways, but also a specialist in others. So let's talk a little bit about, I think a little behind, so I'm going to go through this slide fairly quickly. So all of that is well and good, the questions that I asked in the previous slide, but how can I change my thinking in order to really prepare for the future? Because without changing our thinking, or at least understanding our thinking and our worldview, we may continue to miss some great opportunities. So what brain research is showing us is this, that there is the illusion that all of us encounter. It's not just a few people. And those who break out of it because they are now paying deeper attention to what they are seeing and how they are seeing it and what are the conclusions that they are drawing from it. All of us suffer from what we call the illusion of seeing it all. And by that we mean, so for example, if I present you with a piece of data, or if I show you a video, or if I make a presentation, you will leave with the assumption that I have a good understanding of this. Our brain tricks us into believing that we have seen it all. We have not. Far from it. The second is what we call hindsight bias. Knowing what happened alters our perception of why it happened. So the human brain has a very compelling need to associate a reason with everything that happens in our lives, in the communities that we live in. We have to find that reason. It's just natural for our human brain. And so we assume that this is the reason why something happened, and because of that, it can lead to further confusion in our lives, or it can lead to a propagation of poor decision making, and this is called the hindsight bias. So I'll give you just this very quick example. I was talking about insights that are right under our noses earlier, and if you look at the drop in oil prices, it's a very good example of how these things can happen to any of us, right? So why the sudden drop in oil prices, and how come so many of the experts in the oil industry did not see that coming? Why is it that so many hedge fund managers did not see this coming? Well, here's a very simple example. What one hedge fund manager, I think he was 31 years old, what he started to notice was that the inventory of oil supplies was on an upward bound. And he thought, okay, this is just maybe something short-term, but once it came within his radar, he started to watch it, and he noticed that it was increasing significantly. And so he tells his team that we really need to watch this because oil prices, I think, are going to hit rock bottom. It's not that that data was not available to the other experts, to the other hedge fund managers, but how we pay attention to, what we pay attention to, and how we see things that are right under our noses is an extraordinarily important thing. Unfortunately, even though this is extremely important, and this is a topic that I love to talk about, the fast thinking versus slow thinking of our brains, I'm just going to be able to touch on it, and if we have time at the end, I will come back to it. What we know about our human brain is that it has two parts, and often people will say, yes, the right side of our brain and the left brain. That's not what we are talking about here. What we know now about the human brain, and we've known this for some time, except that now it is in the popular literature, is that our brain has two parts to it. One is called the fast-thinking brain, and the other is the slow-thinking brain. The fast-thinking brain is how we are able to navigate the world. So every morning when you go to start your car, you're not looking at your car with great mystery, and you're looking at your keys and saying, oh my God, what is this? How do I start the ignition? You know, it's automatic. So we need the fast-thinking part of our brain to be able to make those swift decisions so that we can be on autopilot mode, at least for some of the tasks that we do regularly. The fast-thinking part of our brain is also what tells us that when we see a cop car in the rear view mirror, you know what to do. You're saying, hit those brakes as fast as you can. Or if you're in a dark alley and you see somebody coming the other side, you know to pay attention. Or if you see a bull dashing across at you, you know what to do. So we need the fast-thinking part of our brain to help us navigate our daily world. Of course, if you have a fast-thinking brain, then you have a slow-thinking brain. The slow-thinking brain, it it doesn't mean your brain is thinking slow. It simply means that it's going to pay more attention to the task at hand. So for example, if I ask you, what is 247 times 64? Sure, you can do that, but you may need, some of you may need 10 seconds, some of you might need a minute to really focus on that and do that. If you're working on a problem at work and you're intensely engaged in problem solving and somebody comes and says, hey, you want to go do lunch? It distracts you. It takes away your attention, and it might take a few minutes to come back to it. That's the slow thinking part of our brain. The downside to this is that the fast thinking part of our brain will often trick us into believing that we have the right solution. In other words, the slow thinking part of our brain is inherently wired to be lazy. It doesn't want to do work unless it has to do work. This is why we make bad hiring decisions, because our fast thinking part of our brain is in high gear. We like the individual, we like their smile, we think they're very pleasant, we thought they listen well, and so our propensity to hire them keeps increasing, whereas in a hiring decision, it is highly a slow thinking brain project. So because our fast-thinking brain tricks us so often, this is why we end up making poor decisions. So James, I'm going to continue the remaining 2 slides, which is for organizations, and then take questions, if that's okay with you.
That is fine. Go right ahead.
Okay, so as we have some managers in this webinar as well, I want to talk a little bit about how can an organization better prepare for the future. As all of you know, and I'm sure you say that in your website, you probably say that in your brochures, you say that in your hiring processes, in your ads, whatever else it may be. The talent pipeline is what helps an organization to survive. I'm sure many of the managers already face this shortage of meaningful talent. So let me begin with one that is my favorite topic. And again, this is very research-based. I won't have the time to go into all of it. I think the first mistake that organizations do is to write terrible job descriptions, right? Job descriptions that can actually influence some people who may be great fit for this particular job that we're advertising to stay away. Job descriptions, we have hundreds of examples that are poorly written, not in terms of their language or grammar, but in terms of what does it mean to motivate somebody to apply for your position. Your work starts the moment the job description is going to go before the eyes of potential candidates. So this is an important part in terms of preparing for the future and attracting good talent. The second thing is the importance of doing talent branding, and this was part of one of my presentations. Often when we think about branding, we talk about company branding, right? But talent branding is an entirely different ballgame. So when you look at Google, or when you look at Facebook, or when you look at some of the most successful companies, in New York, we would talk about Wegmans, our grocery store, which often is the #1 top employer in terms of attracting talent. And Wegmans is not some rinky-dinky little store. It's just a very highly well put together store. So what do they do that helps them to attract talent, where they can turn down so many highly qualified applicants, is the quality of talent branding. And talent branding has different dimensions to it. When we hire because we are in pain often, and we want that person to come in and to be able to do everything that today's job demands, right? And we want them to be Superman or Superwoman, right? So you see the job description, the skill set getting longer and longer. This is difficult to do, but it will be well worth your time if you split the job, at least in your mind. 75% of the job that this person has to do, has to take away my pain points of today, the burden of today, where that position is unfilled or not filled with a qualified candidate. But give yourself some mental room to fill the remaining part of that job description with what do you think your company will need next year, 2 years down the road. I understand this can be challenging, especially for HR managers, or they don't want to go there, but you have to compel them to go there. You will see, if you can do this, that the quality of the candidate that you're bringing in will be remarkably better than what you hire if you say, I need somebody to fill this position today. Managers, you have the challenge of understanding the relationship between motivation and rewards, and to actively look for, does this person fit with my culture? Excuse me. So when we talk about a cultural fit, it's important to look at the dimensions of your culture that tie in with the performance of the individual, or with the characteristics of the individual, with not so much with their skill portfolio as much as their strength portfolio. And this may sound the same, but skill is not strength. The strength is a personality trait that contributes to the well-being and success of your organization. A skill is something that is taught or can be taught. A skill is something that is learned. Dedicate time to staring into the future. Nobody has the time these days. Everybody is drawn in a million different directions. And we currently live in a world where we stare at our emails or check our emails a minimum of 36 times per hour. That's what research shows. 36 times per hour we check our emails. So when our attention is distracted so heavily, and when we are drawn, our brain is asked to look at different things within a matter of 60 minutes, we find that our ability to really focus and concentrate is pretty much lost. So quiet time is essential to be able to do that. And here is something that you may find interesting. There's a couple of books that have been written on it, and quite compelling research findings, is that often happy people are successful people. We hire successful people and then we hope that they will be happy, but actually the reverse is true. Happy people build on their success and are committed to the success of others. And you may, as I'm talking about this, there are people that will come to your mind. They are happy and therefore they look at problems differently. Their brain looks at problems differently. They are able to solve problems critically in an innovative way, and they in turn are committed to the success of others as well. So when you're hiring somebody, make sure that you hire those that have some talent as well. Finally, just wanted to very quickly touch on STEM Smart. It is a nonprofit company that I established, and the goal really is to find a way to counteract what we are seeing and experiencing throughout this country, and that is we don't have enough people coming into the high-tech sector. And what we know is that while we can do a whole session just on this, the key is for young people to have internships, to experience your company, your work, so that they continue to stay or continue to come to work for you. Here is the research. The research shows that 67% of interns often sign up and stay with the company far longer than non-interns. So that should give you some pause for thought in how you can start an internship program. We can help you with that. We post the internships. We bring you qualified candidates to your doorstep, and you can take a look at it, and if you need any help with launching one, we will be happy to help you. We are bringing out a STEM print magazine in September called STEM Matters. Again, what we found was that while everybody is talking about STEM and skill shortage, if you talk to a high school student or even college students and their parents, very few of them really understand what are the career options. And yes, they can go on the web and look, but like anybody else, we are overwhelmed with the amount of information. So we are bringing out specific issues. It's a print magazine to simply talk about, if you're a high school student, here's the portfolio. If you're a college student, here are the internships that you can get, that you need to get, so that we offer them step-by-step guidance on how to do that. And finally, I am a consultant. I help with best practices in recruitment and retention, organizational development, which includes leadership, cultural fit, and all of that. And I want to thank James and WH Meena for giving me this opportunity. And we have a few minutes, so I'm open to any questions.
Thank you once again, Dr. Gupta, for that. I think the big question that was coming back to that was of real keen interest, as I don't think anybody has heard this before, going back to your previous slide, on talent branding, and that you hear about the company branding, but on talent branding. If you could spend a couple minutes on going into that a little bit more detail, because we know that job descriptions can be really bland and boring, but on the talent branding, what are some of the areas that managers and companies can look into?
So the first question that I would ask a manager is, what is your talent brand? And when we ask that question, people often say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And what that question is prompting you to think about is, you have to sow the seeds as a company that is a wonderful place to work for long before you're thinking about recruiting anybody to your company. Whether it's a technology position or any other position, you have to ask yourself, and you have to be very blunt and very honest and very brutal about this, why would somebody come to work for me versus my competitor? And often people will say, oh, you know, we pay better than our competitor. But that is something that lasts only for a very short time. So we ask you to look at, exactly like a corporate branding, we ask you to look at different aspects of your talent brand. So number one, why should you come to work for us? What is your future going to look like? And we ask you to start this branding process way before you need your first employee. So what we know is that, from neuroscience again, we know that the more they hear about you, the more likely they are to gravitate toward applying for a position in your company. If they've never heard about you, right, then they think, well, I don't know who this company is and I really don't want to apply. So start the marketing and the branding piece, exactly like you would with a company brand, a product brand. Start the marketing and branding piece well ahead of time. Continue the courtship for a longer duration, and then you can nail the piece before the person comes for the interview and during the interview process. I cannot tell you how many candidates have said, you know, I went to this company and the interview process itself was just, you know, they assumed that I was desperate to fill that position. And actually the candidate also has choices, and so we need to look at that and say, what are we doing at every step in the cycle that we can contribute to the branding? So there's a figure with a number of steps, 8 to 10 steps, that talks about the talent brand, and each of those 8 to 10 steps you have to address in order to build your brand.
That is great stuff. Unfortunately, we are at the 1 hour mark. It is now 2 o'clock, and we have quite a few other questions. What I will do, I will send those on to Dr. Gupta, and hopefully she can send responses back, and I'll make sure that those questions that we did not get a chance to get to, you will get answers for. As well, this has been recorded, so it will be up on our website in a couple of days, and those that were able to participate will be getting a copy quickly, so you can certainly go back on other points because there was a lot to take in. Once again, I just want to thank Dr. Uma Gupta for taking the time to speak with us. And yes, I am going to take her up on future webinars with us. So stay tuned. With that, I'm James Kemper, WH Meaner and Associates. I want to thank you very much for attending, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.